This is a fictional royal drama scenario. Imagine the doors of a state reception opening inside Buckingham Palace. Ambassadors are waiting beneath chandeliers. The king is standing beneath the royal crest. Cameras are trained on the podium. Every guest expects Queen Camilla to step forward and deliver the most important speech of the evening. But she does not appear. Instead, Princess Anne walks into the hall carrying a crimson folder. It does not belong to her. Inside, it is the speech Camilla spent weeks writing for King Charles. A tribute intended to show unity. A speech meant to confirm Camilla's place beside the king. And now, in this fictional royal drama story, Anne must decide whether to read it or erase it. Only hours earlier, an emergency transfer of royal duties had moved Camilla's entire official program to Anne. State receptions, military commemorations, charity visits, diplomatic meetings. Every engagement that once carried Camilla's name now appeared beneath Anne's. The statement was written in calm palace language. Continuity, stability, an orderly transfer of responsibilities. But no one inside the palace thought it was routine. A calendar can be changed overnight. A speech can be reassigned. Trust cannot. Camilla was not told through television. Her private secretary entered the room shortly before the announcement was released, carrying a revised schedule inside a gray folder. The secretary did not offer an explanation. She did not even sit down. She placed the folder on the desk, then stepped back. Camilla knew what it meant before she opened it. The first page listed a hospital visit, reassigned. The second listed a diplomatic luncheon, reassigned. The third listed a military remembrance service, reassigned. Then she reached the final page, the state reception, her reception, the event she had planned personally.
The night she had intended to stand beside Charles and read the handwritten tribute still resting in the crimson folder near her desk. Reassigned. For several seconds, Camilla did not speak. Her speech remained. Her role did not. And that was when the decision became real. It was not just the loss of one public appearance. It was the loss of the visible place she believed she had finally earned at the center of royal life. Before we continue, subscribe for more fictional royal drama stories about power, duty, loyalty, and the private pressure behind public ceremony. Because this is not simply a story about Camilla losing a schedule. It is about a king forced to choose between his marriage and the institution. It is about and being handed responsibility she never requested. And it is about a speech that could either finish a family conflict or reveal an unexpected act of compassion. The first question was obvious. What happened inside the palace that made Charles approve a transfer against his own wife? The answer began with something that looked insignificant. A seating card. Earlier that morning, Charles had read the transfer order alone inside his private study. In this imagined story, it was only 3 pages long, but the consequences filled the entire palace. The first page moved Camilla's official duties to Anne's office. The second reassigned staff, briefings, security arrangements, and event access. The third carried one sentence Charles could not stop reading. The arrangement will remain in force until the sovereign determines that confidence and continuity have been restored. That sentence meant Camilla could not decide when her role returned. Charles would decide. He placed the document on his desk and stared toward the rain-darkened palace grounds. Outside, drivers arrived at the gates. Staff crossed corridors carrying folders. Phones were answered. Security teams checked doors. The institution looked as calm as it had looked every day before. But Charles knew a private crisis was already moving through its rooms. He had not stopped caring about Camilla. That was what made the choice so painful. If he had wanted to punish her, the order would have been easy. If he had been angry without regret, he could have signed it without hesitation. But Charles believed something more serious had happened. Private tension had started touching public duty. And once that happens, a monarch cannot treat it as only a family disagreement. Official duties are not merely appearances. They are proof of trust. They decide who receives sensitive briefings, who welcomes foreign visitors, who stands beside the sovereign, and who speaks for the crown when cameras are recording. If those responsibilities become tools in a private struggle, every ceremony becomes unstable. Charles believed the line had been crossed, and the person he trusted most to restore order was, and a few minutes later, and entered the study. There was no ceremony, no greeting, no attempt to soften the decision. Charles pointed to the transfer order and read it in silence. She did not ask why she had been chosen. She asked one question: "Has Camilla been told?" Charles looked away for half a second. That was all and needed to know. The announcement had been prepared before Camilla was informed. Advisors had feared that if the news reached her first, the palace could lose control of the story. They wanted every calendar change, staff reassignment, and official instruction ready before anybody could resist, and hated the logic of it. "This protects the institution," she said. Charles nodded. "It does not protect your marriage." Charles removed his glasses and set them beside the document. "I know," and looked back down at the order. Then she asked the question he had been avoiding. "What happened?" Charles did not answer at once. He walked toward the window. Finally, he said, "It started at the Commonwealth reception," and remembered it clearly. The flags, the guests, the formal smiles, and one strange detail that had seemed minor at the time. Her seating card. 3 weeks earlier, the palace had hosted a Commonwealth renewal ceremony. It was an event built around precision. Who enters first? Who greets whom? Who stands beside the king? Who appears in photographs sent across the world before the evening ends? Inside royal protocol, details are never just details. That was why Anne noticed the card immediately. Her assigned place had been moved. Instead of standing beside Charles during the central presentation, she had been placed behind 2 people with less senior ceremonial roles. Most viewers would have missed it. Most guests would have assumed it was routine, but and understood what it meant. Order of precedence is not about a chair. It is about authority, access, and the message sent to everyone watching. And folded the card once, then walked toward Camilla, who was reviewing a final guest list near the edge of the hall, and did not accuse her. She did not raise her voice. She simply asked whether Charles had approved the alteration. Camilla looked down at the card, then back at Anne. In this fictional scenario, she said the event needed to reflect the king's household first. She said it was time for the palace to stop treating Anne as if she were the permanent figure beside Charles. She said the monarchy had changed, and the ceremony needed to show it. Her voice was controlled, but the meaning was sharp, and could have called the protocol office. She could have demanded the original position. She could have created a scene in front of staff, diplomats, and photographers. Instead, she stepped into the altered place. She completed the ceremony. She smiled when required. She protected the crown from seeing the conflict. But, and did not forget, after the last guest had departed, Charles's private secretary brought 2 versions of the event program into his study. The original plan and the altered plan. The difference was unmistakable. The revised version had been issued late. It suggested that Charles had approved the change. But, in this imagined story, he had never seen it. A protocol warning was attached. It stated that the original arrangement should not be changed. The warning had been received. The alteration had still gone ahead. Charles was not angry because it had been moved a few feet backward. He was angry because his authority had been borrowed. That was the real breach. Not a photograph. Not a seating card. Not an awkward exchange between 2 women. Authority. A king cannot allow private insecurity to dictate official arrangements in his name. The moment that happens, staff begin choosing sides. Advisors question which instruction carries weight. Every event becomes a quiet battle over who controls the palace. Later, Charles asked and why she had not come directly to him. Her response stayed with him. "I would never embarrass the crown in public," she said, "but I will not allow your name to be used for a private argument." It was not a threat. It was a boundary. And Charles realized his own silence had helped create the problem. For years, he had wanted Camilla and to coexist without forcing him to choose. He hoped time would soften the tension. He hoped royal duty would make personal resentment smaller. Instead, silence had allowed it to grow. Now it had reached the machinery of the crown. That evening, Charles ordered a private meeting. No advisors, no cameras, no secretaries outside the door. Only Charles and Camilla and the documents that proved the palace was no longer dealing with a simple family disagreement. Charles entered the private sitting room first, and followed a few minutes later. Camilla arrived last. Nobody smiled. Nobody asked how anyone was feeling. Charles had placed the two event programs on the table. The original version, the altered version. Beside them sat the protocol warning and the disputed approval note. Camilla spoke first. She said the palace had turned and into the answer to every difficult question. When an engagement needed discipline, and was called. When a charity needed attention, and was sent. When a ceremony needed someone reliable beside Charles, and was placed at the center of it. Camilla said it had become an imbalance. She said the king's wife was expected to stand aside, while the king's sister became the image of stability. And listened. Then she answered, "The issue is not where anyone stands. The issue is who has the right to move them." Camilla looked at Charles. She expected him to defend her. Instead, he asked one question. "Did you know the arrangement had been rejected?" The room went silent. In this fictional story, Camilla admitted that she had seen the warning. But she believed Charles would understand after the ceremony. She believed he would see that Anne's position beside him created the impression that his sister had greater influence than his wife. She believed the evening would go smoothly. She believed the change would disappear into the larger success of the ceremony. And she believed Charles would choose her once the guest had left. But Charles did not see a harmless adjustment. He saw an official warning ignored. He saw his name used without consent. He saw private fear allowed to touch public duty. And that changed everything. Charles told Camilla that advisors had documented other concerns. Late changes to guest access, competing instructions sent to staff, and uncertainty about who held authority during key preparations. The seating incident had not created the problem. It had exposed it. Camilla stood. She told Charles that if he acted now, the entire palace would understand what it meant. Everyone would see that he had chosen and over his wife. Charles did not deny her pain, but he refused to let pain become an excuse for disorder. He lifted a second document from the desk, the emergency transfer order. Camilla's expression changed and looked at Charles. She had not known it already existed. Charles explained that the palace needed a clear line. Until confidence was restored, Camilla's official program would move to Anne's office. The words landed heavily. Camilla did not ask which events were affected. She already knew. She asked something more painful. "And you chose her?" Charles did not say, "and mattered more." He did not say Camilla was incapable. He said, "and was trusted by the people who needed certainty." For Camilla, that was worse. Competence can be debated. Trust is far harder to recover once it is lost. Charles asked, and whether she would accept the responsibility, and placed one condition on the table. "No public statement may suggest that I wanted this." Charles looked at her and continued, "I will take the work. I will not take a victory." For the first time, Camilla looked at Anne differently. Not with trust, not with forgiveness, but with the small recognition that Anne had not created the crisis to claim a prize. The meeting ended without reconciliation. Charles signed the order and took the revised schedule. Camilla returned to her office, and waiting on her desk beneath the new calendar was the crimson folder containing the speech she had written for Charles. The cruelest sign of lost authority is rarely a public announcement. It is an empty calendar. In this fictional scenario, Camilla watched months of preparation disappear from her week, one page at a time. A charity visit. Transferred. A veterans commemoration. Transferred. A diplomatic luncheon. Transferred. The state reception. Transferred. Each item had connected her to the public work of the crown. Each one represented preparation, duty, and the long effort to prove she belonged beside Charles. Now every event carried Anne's name. Staff began collecting briefing books. Transport plans were redirected. Guest lists were sent to another office. Aides who had worked around Camilla for years were asked whether they would support Anne's new program. One accepted immediately. "The work has to continue," the aide said. Another refused. "I can serve the crown," the aide said in this imagined story, "but I cannot pretend loyalty is a piece of furniture." Camilla did not stop anyone. She sat near the window and watched the folders leave. The crimson speech folder remained on her desk. Eventually, her private secretary asked whether it should be delivered to Anne. Camilla opened it. The speech began with a tribute to Charles. It spoke about service, endurance, and the strength of institutions that survive difficult moments without abandoning responsibility. Camilla had written every line believing she would read it herself. Now the words felt unbearable. She had written about unity, and the palace had chosen another woman to represent it. It was not a royal message, not a formal tribute, just a private line from a wife to her husband. You taught me that duty is easier when you are not carrying it alone. Camilla stared at the sentence, then closed the folder, across the palace, and was beginning to understand the scale of what she had accepted. Her office was filling with new briefings, staff questions, security updates, diplomatic notes, and calls from charities needing certainty. Her calendar had expanded so quickly that even her most experienced aides appeared unsettled. The state reception was only days away, but it had no speech. She could ask the king's office for a new draft. She could commission something safe, polished, and neutral. She could erase Camilla's work and start again. That would be easier. It would also confirm every fear Camilla had ever had, and asked whether the original speech had been transferred. The answer was no. Camilla had kept it, and looked at the revised diary, then at the clock. She understood there was only one decision left. She requested a private meeting with Camilla. No charles, no advisors, no protocol officials, no one to translate pain into procedure. Just Anne, Camilla, and the crimson folder between them, and crossed the palace alone. She did not carry the transfer order. She did not bring security notes or new schedules. She brought nothing that made her look like the woman taking control of Camilla's life. When she entered Camilla's sitting room, Camilla was standing beside the window. The crimson folder rested on a table nearby. For several seconds, neither woman spoke. Camilla expected and to ask for the speech. She expected a formal explanation about why the reception needed to proceed. She expected and to use duty as a shield. Instead, and said, "I did not ask for this." Camilla turned slowly and continued, "I know that does not change what happened. I know it does not return your work. But I did not ask for your program, your staff, or your place beside my brother." Camilla's voice remained calm. "Yet you accepted it and did not look away." "Yes," she said, "because I could not leave the crown uncertain." That was the truth neither woman could avoid, and had accepted responsibility because refusing it would make the institution look fragile. Camilla had lost responsibility because Charles believed confidence had been broken. Neither woman had emerged untouched. Camilla sat down. In this imagined story, she admitted that the seating car decision had come from fear, not hatred. Charles looked down. The diplomats listened. The cameras recorded every second. In the private viewing room, Camilla sat perfectly still. The words were hers, and was giving them back to the crown. Then, and reached the final paragraph. The part Camilla had allowed her to use. Duty does not ask whether a moment is easy and read. It asks whether the work still needs to be done. The room remained silent, and in that silence, the meaning of the evening changed, and was no longer standing at the podium as a replacement. She was standing there as a custodian, a woman asked to carry responsibility without humiliating the person who had lost it. But as enclosed the folder, Charles noticed something missing. The final handwritten page. Camilla's private line to him was gone, and in that moment, Charles understood that Camilla had drawn a boundary of her own. She had allowed the crown to keep the speech, but she had kept the words meant only for her husband. The reception ended without incident. Diplomats were greeted. Guests departed. The cameras moved outside the gates, and the public story became clear, and had delivered Camilla's speech. The palace had continued without visible disruption. Charles's decision had worked, but privately, Charles could not stop thinking about the missing page. That night, he sent Camilla a handwritten note. Not a summons, not a formal request, a personal message. He asked to speak with her before the palace offices opened the following morning. Camilla read it alone. The envelope containing her private sentence rested beside the crimson folder. Charles had written only one line. "I should have protected us before I was forced to protect the institution." Camilla read it twice. Then she placed it beside her own unfinished message. "You taught me that duty is easier when you are not carrying it alone. Neither sentence changed the transfer order. Neither restored the duties. But together, they revealed the real failure. Charles had carried pressure alone until the people closest to him felt abandoned. Camilla had tried to protect her place through control until she made that place less secure, and had protected the crown through silence until silence became impossible. The next morning, Charles and Camilla met privately, no advices, but to stop allowing silence to decide the future of their family. Across the palace, and received a short note from Camilla. It did not ask for the schedule back. It did not request a public correction. It simply asked and to protect the charitable causes connected to the new program. And beneath that request, Camilla wrote 6 words and did not expect. "Thank you for not erasing me," and read the note alone in her office. Outside, staff were already moving through the new routine. Briefing folders were delivered. Calls were scheduled. The transfer duties were no longer a shocking announcement. They were becoming reality, and understood that this was the most difficult stage. Not the confrontation, not the signed order, not the state reception, the routine. Because once a new structure becomes normal, it begins to look permanent, and had no desire to build a victory from Camilla's loss. She had accepted the duties because the crown required continuity. But she also knew that every successful appearance would make it harder for Camilla to return to the role she had once held. That was the burden nobody outside the palace could fully see. Power is often mistaken for winning, but responsibility is rarely a victory. It is the weight of being trusted while somebody else is hurting, and instructed her office to preserve Camilla's charitable correspondence. She kept staff who understood the work. She made sure the causes attached to the transferred program continued without disruption. It was a quiet decision, but it mattered, and was not rebuilding the role in her own image. She was protecting the work itself. When Charles heard about it, he understood what and was doing. She was refusing to turn a family fracture into a palace purge. She was proving that accountability did not require humiliation, and that became the emotional center of the story. Camilla had lost the visible platform, but her work had not been discarded. Charles had enforced a boundary, but he had not erased his wife, and had accepted responsibility, but she had refused to celebrate. In the public imagination, the story had begun as a removal. A queen consort steps back. A princess takes over. A king chooses stability. But the deeper story was more difficult. 3 people have been forced to confront the difference between being close to the crown and being trusted by it. Camilla learned that belonging cannot be secured by controlling every room. Charles learned that love does not excuse silence when boundaries are needed, and learned that duty can place someone at the center of power without giving them a moment of peace. And the crimson folder became the symbol of all of it, not because it contained a scandal, not because it held a secret decree, but because it carried words that could have been used to humiliate someone, and were instead used to preserve her dignity. Weeks later, the state program was running smoothly, and carried the responsibilities with the discipline everyone expected from her. The palace appeared stable. The press had moved on to newer questions. But inside the family, the consequences remained. Camilla still had private causes she cared about. Charles still kept the handwritten page inside his desk, and still received the revised briefing folders each morning. Nothing had returned to the way it was, and perhaps that was the point. Some decisions are too important to reverse simply because they hurt. But pain does not have to become cruelty. One evening, and received a message that surprised her. Camilla wanted to visit one of the charities connected to the transfer program, not as an official representative, not with cameras, not with a palace announcement, only as a private supporter of work she still cared about, and approved it without hesitation. The visit did not restore Camilla's former role, but it proved that service could survive even when titles, schedules, and public positions changed. When Charles heard about the arrangement, he stood alone near the window of his study. The palace outside looked as it always had, ancient, immovable, certain. But Charles now understood that institutions do not remain strong because nothing changes. They remain strong because people finally face the changes they have avoided. He looked again at Camilla's handwritten line. You taught me that duty is easier when you're not carrying it alone. For the first time, he understood it fully. Duty was never supposed to become a wall between a husband and wife. It was supposed to teach them how to carry pressure together. The lesson had arrived late, but it had arrived. The final image of this fictional story is not at a podium. It is not Camilla staring at an empty calendar. It is not Charles signing the transfer order. It is the crimson folder resting inside Anne's office. The speech still inside. Camilla's words preserved. Anne's responsibility intact. And one private page no longer hidden inside a public tribute, but held where it finally belonged. Between a husband and his wife. The duties changed hands. The palace changed its routine. The balance of power changed. But Anne refused to turn change into erasure, and took Camilla's place. But she did not take her voice. She gave it back to the room. And in doing so, she reminded the palace of something no official order could ever say. Duty without dignity becomes punishment, but duty with accountability can still protect the crown.